Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Composer Duels. What is a composer duel? Well, as you know, throughout music history, certain eras tend to pair off composers. You know, Haydn and Mozart. That's like maybe the most famous. So my question to you is this. Which one do you prefer and why? I'm going to go down my list of 10 composer duels. And I'm going to tell you what my preference is. And then you can chime in the comments section, and please feel free. Tell me yours. You can do one or you can do all. I'm going to type the little duel we're talking about down below so that you can see what it is. And let's see where we come out, shall we? I think this will be kind of fun. Let's see what happens. So my very first, and I'm going in kind of chronological order, sort of, maybe not 100%. Bach versus Handel. Now we all know about that one, right? And my choice, squarely, which you may have noticed since I just did a video of the Brandenburg Concertos, is Handel. Because Handel is fun and Bach is, well, not as much fun. Let's put it that way. Two astonishingly great composers born around the same time. They could not possibly be more different. Isn't it fascinating? And they came from the same part of the world too. But I just think Handel has a joy, a sensuality, a freedom, a range of improvisatory flair and unexpectedness that Bach doesn't approach. Now, you may disagree, so feel free. Pick your favorite, you know? Number 2, Scarlatti versus Couperin. How do you like that one, huh? The two great keyboard specialty composers of their age. Both of them wrote gorgeous, gorgeous music full of fantasy and beauty and imagination, and they were amazing stylists on the harpsichord, a tough instrument to write for, let's face it. But my choice has to be Scarlatti. Again, why? Because his music is so brilliant and it has a sense of place, you know, the Spanishisms and things. You just get a feeling for where he was, and it's an inclusive music. It features sounds from his life, from the street, from all around him, and he manages to reproduce that all on the harpsichord and all in the course of little tiny binary movements that he called sonatas or esercizi or whatever he called them. It's amazing what he packs into it. Couperin is no slouch either. I mean, Couperin's harpsichord suites are largely programmatic. They're full of interesting contrast and content and elegance and style, but I find his music to be a somewhat, shall we say, indoors music. It's not music that breathes fresh air like Scarlatti's does. But take your pick and let me know what you think. Next, Haydn versus Mozart. That was the example. That's the one we have to do. And probably this will also come as no surprise to those of you who have been watching these videos. My favorite is Haydn, although Mozart is, of course, incomparably great at all of the things that Haydn didn't do. And that's one of the reasons why I think Mozart's reputation is a little higher than Haydn's, because Mozart wrote operas above all. So he captured the whole operatic world in one fell swoop, and deservedly so, because Mozart's operas are absolutely astounding. On the other hand, Haydn, for symphonies, string quartets, instrumental music generally, pretty much unbeatable, folks. He really was. He really, really was. So in a sense, there's no point in choosing one over the other because their skills were so complementary. They really were. But if I had to choose, I would go for Haydn. I really would. Next, Brahms versus Dvorak. I would go for Dvorak on a heartbeat. I don't think, for me, that's a no-brainer. Why? Because I think he was the most versatile genius of the entire latter half of the 19th century. Really. I mean, he did everything, and very, very, very well. I mean, he wrote symphonies that were as good as Brahms's. He He wrote chamber music that was as good as Brahms's. But in addition, he wrote symphonic poems. He wrote a whole slew of orchestral works. He wrote fabulous operas, which are so tragically underrated. I mean, think about it. There's more than just Rusalka. I mean, Kate and the Devil is a masterpiece. Dmitri is fabulous. There are great, great Dvorak operas sitting out there that don't get played. And then, of course, there are his choral works. There's the Requiem, which is one of the great settings of the 19th century. There's the Spectre's Bride, which is absolutely terrific. I mean, there is a lot of great Dvorak, and we only play a little fraction of it. Probably because if he got the kind of recognition he really deserved, everybody would know that he was greater than Brahms. So there. Now, Brahms, of course, is an astonishingly great composer as well. I don't want to take anything away from him, but I think that Dvorak takes the palm in my book. Next, Bruckner versus Mahler. Well, it's got to be Mahler. The reason is because Mahler is an incredibly comprehensive genius, whereas Bruckner was an extremely limited one. I mean, Bruckner's music is incomparably spiritual, if that's the thing you listen to in music, but that's about what it is. I mean, his range was, and emotional range, let us say, I think was fairly narrow compared to Mahler's. And I think that Mahler had a much more vivid orchestral palette and technique. And I just find I'm an eclectic by nature, so I am going to like Mahler. Bruckner will obviously be the preference for those who like styles which are sort of hermetically sealed, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Bruckner's style has a purity and a single-mindedness which is, absolutely fabulous in an obsessive compulsive kind of way. But I think that if I had to choose one, I would choose Mahler. Next, Debussy versus Ravel. Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? It really is. They were both excellent. And even though they were both supposed to be impressionists, it doesn't really apply. It doesn't really apply to Ravel. In any case, barely applies to Debussy. But if I had to choose, I would have to take Debussy, only because, first of all, he wrote more music. I mean, Ravel wrote really very little music. And I think there's just more of Debussy to enjoy. And also because I think Debussy's music strikes a deeper note. Ravel's music, however fabulous the surface polish, always has this sense of artifice about it, doesn't it? I mean, there's a sheen to it that's absolutely hypnotic and a wonderful fantasy and almost an innocence to it, even when he's trying to be like jazzy and sleazy. That's quite wonderful. But Debussy, I think, is just a more profound artist in every respect. And I think, of course, he was much more important in terms of music history, but in a good way. In other words, he really broke new ground, and that was his and his alone. So I would have to choose Debussy if I had to choose. Isn't it great that we don't have to choose? I'm going to jump back a little bit now. Chopin versus Schumann. Oh, this one's easy for me anyway. Chopin, hands down. Hands down. Why? Because Chopin had that incomparable bel canto melody married to a completely unprecedented harmonic sense. Schumann, for me, is always a bit foursquare. And I find him kind of irritating, actually, to get right down to it. I mean, I can appreciate what he did, and there are specific works that I think are absolutely wonderful. I mean, I saw an amazing performance of the David Bundler Tenza and things like that really, really impressed me, that I really enjoyed. But so often I find his music to be just kind of clunky and not too interesting, although pianists will probably kill me for saying so. Also, my dad hated Schumann, and you grow up with that. But Chopin for sure, the unbelievable poet of the piano, never equaled. Next, Sibelius versus Nielsen. Now, it's another one where I would hate to have to choose, but these are the two great Scandinavian symphonists of the first decades of the 20th century. And Oh, what a horrible choice, because they really don't sound anything alike, do they? And they don't really have anything particularly in common. Each has their own personal style. I probably would go with Sibelius simply because Sibelius had a wider range in what he did, and he just wrote more. There's more to enjoy. But between Sibelius's tone poems and symphonies and theatrical music, and the violin concerto, I think that sort of tips the balance his way. I'm not entirely sure that Nielsen wasn't the greater symphonist of the two. I mean, when you get right down to it, that his music isn't somehow more profound emotionally, and also more open, more giving emotionally than Sibelius's is. But, this is a game, and in this game we have to pick. So I will pick Sibelius with great reluctance. Who do you pick? And then we have Verdi versus Wagner. Oh, yes, the two great operatic voices of the 19th century. I mean, who do you pick? What can you do? It's easy. Verdi. God, it's Verdi. It's got to be Verdi. I mean, Wagner was a pygmy next to Verdi. Totally. An obnoxious, jackboot stomping Nazi pygmy. Whereas Verdi was just a fabulous genius whose operas deserve their fame and immortality. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Now, again, you may disagree, although I can't imagine why anybody would, because Verdi is so overwhelmingly more important and deeper and more emotionally significant and more finished and talented composer than Wagner could ever aspire to being, that I don't know why anyone would even touch Wagner. But there you go. And finally, well, not quite finally, I have a little surprise coming up. Schoenberg versus Stravinsky. There's another one where, here's the interesting thing, is that they started out, of course, poles apart, but they wound up with Stravinsky sort of going over to Schoenberg's side, turning to the dark side, right? That's why I would pick Stravinsky, frankly, because of his stylistic, chameleon-like ability to jump from one style to another while still remaining himself. Of course, what's fascinating about that last statement is that it's equally true of Schoenberg, because Schoenberg wrote in many different styles. There was his Wagnerian phase, then his chromatic phase, then his atonal phase, then his serial phase, all during which he wrote tonal music too, exactly. And it all sounds like Schoenberg. But that's part of the problem. It's all equally difficult. It doesn't matter what he did. It was all somehow, he managed to make everything sound somewhat off-putting. I mean, it was a gift in its way. Schoenberg was difficult and wanted to be difficult. Stravinsky could be difficult, but didn't always want to be difficult. And I think that he simply had, the stronger personality of the two, and the more winning style for me. But, if you like Schoenberg more, especially certain works by Schoenberg, you don't have to go all the way with either of them, do you? Because most people don't like late Stravinsky, and most people don't like late Schoenberg. So it works for both, doesn't it? But I'd take Stravinsky. I mean, I know that's the cliched choice. I should be provocative, right? And I should say, oh, Schoenberg, of course, I mean, nah, I'm not going to do that because I have to listen to the result. You know what I mean? But here's the bonus question. The bonus question. You ready for this one? Palestrina versus Victoria. I'm not even going to attempt it. You try it. See how far you get. Thank you, folks. I want to know how you feel about these duels. Let me have your picks. Keep on listening. Take care.